Ideas for Impact, a new podcast where innovation meets sustainability head on. Let's take a fresh look at how we do business. Changemakers are innovating solutions to some of the toughest challenges we face in our world. In the process, they are creating their own mark on industry. Our guests are rebels with a cause. They are tearing down barriers, redefining success, and leaving a mark on their industries. Our guests are the disruptors who refuse to settle for business as usual. Join us to unravel the lessons learned behind their failures and their triumphs and uncover the hidden opportunities for positive change. Co-hosted by me, Joanna Buczkowska-McCumber, and my friend, Deborah Host. Hello, Lucas. It's great to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here, Joanna.
Yeah. Why don't we get started by you telling us and the audience about Surfrider Foundation and the work that you do?
Absolutely. So for people who haven't heard of Surfrider, we are a global nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of ocean, waves, and beaches for all people through our powerful activist network. And so we really harness the movement of grassroots volunteers in coastal communities and other aquatic communities internationally to really get active and to address some of the issues that they feel are threatening the aquatic environments in their communities.
So such a big mission for the organization. And of course, Surfrider is part of a much bigger global network. And so how does your work in particular in Canada, connect to that bigger global mission? And perhaps, how do you view your own work in strengthening that bigger global mission as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are part of a network of 8 different international affiliates, we call them. So different countries around the world or regions that have sort of formed a Surfrider affiliate to really address the issues that they see in their countries. Also just for, legal and jurisdictional reasons, it's more efficient and effective to have these separate entities. So we see that in Canada, of course, the US, Europe, Australia, Japan, Argentina, and Senegal in Africa. And so these countries come together to form this international network. And yeah, it's really enabled us to build a strong brand, a lot of visibility and recognition that comes through this sort of internationally scoped structure that then we can leverage to really empower, like I mentioned earlier, these volunteers and communities that are activating our mission through campaigns or programs. And so they get to rely on this brand, use it as a platform to really have an impact that I think stretches way beyond the means of just a group of volunteers in a town or a community.
Yeah, I think that's such an amazing opportunity to not only be part of something that's national, but a movement that's global, and to, have so much learning and leverage the experiences and the work that's happening on a global level, which is amazing. And so for you yourself and your own journey, what drew you personally to ocean conservation and the work of Surfrider?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for me, I had spent a lot of time in my early 20s sort of traveling and getting into surfing and slowly exposing myself to more, I guess, critical analysis of environmental issues that started to inspire me. And I think it was after a trip to Central America, witnessing extreme pollution in the coastal sort of environment. It inspired me to get involved and really guide my education towards environmental conservation. So I studied environmental studies and political science in my undergraduate. And at the same time was heavily involved in surfing as a hobby. And for me, it was like I wanted to exercise what I was learning in university and find an outlet for this passion that was connected to this hobby. And for me personally, I was just a perfect fit. Surfrider was this volunteer organization looking for people to come in and support various programs and campaigns in the community. And so I got involved very early on here in Canada and was able to, I think in many ways, just build momentum within my own studies and my own life to see that by working together in a community of people, of volunteers, we can really do make change. And I've had the privilege to be involved in many different campaigns that have led to a coastal victory that you really do meaningfully protect the coastal environment. So I live in Victoria, British Columbia, and some of the campaigns that we've celebrated here range from beach access wins, where we've worked hard to protect Jordan River in particular. It was previously, many years ago, part of a tree farm license that was removed and then put up for private land sale. And, Surfrider, really dedicated to preserving public access for all people to enjoy the coast, rallied and campaigned for it to become a regional park. And in 2010, that decision was made by the Capital Regional District to turn it into a park that now everyone can enjoy, which is really fantastic. And as a result of that sort of dedicated volunteer push in the community. And then, fast forward a couple years later in 2015, Surfrider was a big part of the campaign activity to call on the regional district to implement sewage treatment in Victoria, which hadn't been done in the past and was impacting water quality. And so our volunteers had been testing water quality for many years and observing that there was a high degree of bacteria present that did sort of threaten recreational water use safety. So we took it upon ourselves to campaign for that. And again, ended up in a campaign victory with sewage treatment being implemented in the region. So, we have these concerns as individuals. And to be able to see that together, we can have these big impacts. That to me is what led me to get involved with Surfrider, and just to sort of see that, together we can have a huge impact.
Yeah, it's always the personal stories that draw people into a lot of this work, right? And I think so much, especially in this season where we're talking about water and ocean, whether it's a company, an organization, or an entrepreneur or an innovator, they have a very personal, typically, story of what drew them into the work of the work that they do, whether it's starting a company or working in this space. And what do you see in, obviously, thank you for sharing all those campaigns. I think those are so interesting, and living also in the same region that you do, you sort of see that. I've been to these places, and so it is important for an organization and group of people to be, responsible for that work, because otherwise nothing's going to happen, right? Nothing's going to change. And what do you see as the biggest threats now in maybe not even just on the West Coast, but in Canada in general, in terms of coastline? What are the biggest threats that you are identifying?
Yeah. So historically, Surfrider was created just over 40 years ago, in 1984, to address impacts to public beach access, so through development or road closures, things like that, or water pollution. I think there was a big concern of water pollution in Southern California, where Surfrider started. So that was kind of the genesis of the organization. And then I'd say about 15 years ago, what we really started to observe was just the rampant rise of the plastic pollution crisis and the impact that was having on coastal ecosystems. And so that's really, I think, become the dominant threat that's facing coastlines. And what's really dynamic about that issue in Canada in particular is that we have this reputation of being kind of having these coastlines that are kind of isolated and remote and beautiful. And many people hold that idea in their mind, especially in British Columbia. We're sort of socialized to supernatural BC and, the wild wilderness, untouched. And it, through our work with Surfrider, traveling to some of these remote places along Vancouver Island in particular, just being shocked to see the degree of plastic pollution that was present in these places that, are really untouched and from human settlement. And they're very, very remote, yet just covered with different types of plastic pollution, ranging from commercial packaging, like beverage containers, all the way to commercial and industrial equipment used for various fisheries and aquaculture. And just the sheer volume and the challenge to try to mitigate it, remove it, is just so daunting, especially when you get into these remote places. And so that to me is really one of the biggest challenges facing coastlines right now. And it doesn't always have to be the stuff you see. Unfortunately, when plastic persists in the marine environment for a long time, it starts to degrade and break down into smaller fragments and becomes, what's commonly referred to as microplastics, which have a huge tendency to impact marine organisms and various aquatic species, and through ingestion, it's just really nasty. So, that's what I think has really inspired a lot of people who are getting involved with Surfrider to really tackle that issue. And as a result, we've, as an organization, have developed resources and campaigns that, really target some of the more problematic forms of pollution. I'll give you two examples. So in British Columbia, from the research that we've done and the research that we've sort of found and analyzed ourselves, we've noticed that certain plastics like expanded polystyrene or styrofoam, often used in marine infrastructure to float things like docks, That is the most common thing that we find, like in the more remote parts of the coastline. It breaks down to these small white little balls. Sometimes you don't even really notice them until you start to take a look when you're at the beach, and they're everywhere. And so we have a campaign that's focused on banning the use of that material in various aquatic infrastructure, both at the federal and provincial level. And another one, which sometimes shocks people, is cigarette filters, or cigarette butts, many people call them. Year after year in settled urban communities, those are the number one most commonly found piece of litter. And the worst thing about those is not only are they plastic and have the tendency to break down into microplastics, they're also laden with tons of toxic chemicals found in, tobacco. And so not only are you having this plastic found all throughout the shoreline sort of environment, it's totally polluting the ecosystem as well through the chemicals that are found in that material. So those type of things are really, I think, big issues for people in the organization. And like I said earlier, as a result, we've really targeted our campaign activity towards addressing those.
Yes, 100%. Like, the reality that microplastics are now, as a result, have been found everywhere in human beings. This is like a massive issue at a global level, right? I mean, I think this is sort of goes beyond just like one country or one region. And it's so actually interesting that Surfrider, starting out as a grassroots organization, has really started to like move into more of this like upstream systems level type work, right? As you've evolved as an organization. So I'm super curious in that work, as you've moved into this more like systems level solutioning, if you will. What does that look like for Surfrider in terms of like policy or advocacy work, whether that's like at a provincial level or at a federal level? How do you approach that work? And as you even explained, there are so many different issues that you have to tackle. How do you approach that? And what are some of the frameworks that you use to be able to do this work?
Yeah, I think what's really helped us strike out a reputation in this sort of activist space is that in a world where there's so much antagonism and aggression, especially within advocacy, we've built this approach that's very positive and collaborative and very solutions oriented. So yeah, upstream is definitely the goal for us in many of our campaigns. And the way we do that is by finding innovative, creative ideas in the community. That's really the result of all this amazing, diverse group of people that we are part of our organization. We're not a top-down organization that's like, we're going to do this and over to you volunteers to implement. We empower the volunteers. We build environmental leaders, and they come up with these amazing ideas, these solutions, because they want to do something. And, with creativity and a problem, there's often a solution. And so we take these solutions and we walk those into the room with decision makers. We showcase those. So we're not only calling out the problem, but we're offering a solution. We're coming to the table in a very constructive way. And I think that's been very powerful for us when it comes to these large scale policy interventions that we're calling for, to be able to say like, there is workable solutions. And so I'll give you an example. The ban that I mentioned earlier that we're really aiming for to eliminate polystyrene from being used in marine infrastructure. So up in Tofino and Ucluelet, our Pacific Rim chapters work very closely with the Toloquet First Nation to identify some of the issues that they were observing in their community. And one of the things that they found to be very problematic was this pollution from these broken down docks, this aging infrastructure that was falling apart, impacting the coastline. And they wanted to do something about it. And so Surfrider listened and worked with them to replace their docks with material that was more environmentally friendly, more sustainable, and avoided that terrible form of plastic being used. And so you can get hard plastic air-filled flotation devices that can be repaired that don't use the polystyrene. So we worked with not just Toloquet First Nation and the dock that they have for the Big Tree Trail. We also worked with the district at Tofino to retrofit the flotation devices on their municipal dock. So for the First Street dock. So again, these were very workable solutions, right? So we can walk into meetings now and say, you've got to get rid of this material. It's terrible for the environment. But there's good news, there's alternatives, right? That are made in Canada. They're tariff proof, which is really important nowadays, and will help to develop a new, more sustainable industry that we can celebrate here in the province, and that could be replicated across the country. So that's sort of our approach, is like, no matter what we're advocating for, we're really coming to the table with solutions. And I think it's bode really well and sort of enabled us to move quicker on some of the policies we're asking for.
Yeah, and I would imagine actually being able also to demonstrate that that it's possible to have a solution, right? That it's not just like we're hypothetically telling you how we think things should work, but like going out there into community or into the particular coastal line and actually demonstrating that whatever that solution might be that you're coming up with, like in this example, that it actually works and that the community is involved, which I love. And on that note too, like you talked about working with Indigenous communities. I'd imagine that is a very common theme and work that you do often with Surfrider is collaborating and working with Indigenous communities across the coastal lines of BC, at least for the work that you do. And what is that experience like? And how do you approach working with the various communities that are on our beautiful coast?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely a focal point for our work that we do in community. And, we engage our volunteers to integrate positive relationship building with local nations. And I think in many cases, it varies across the network. I think on the West Coast and for our Pacific Rim chapter, they've got a really strong history of working very closely with the nations located in that region. In other parts of the province in BC here, there's a smaller degree of collaboration. It really depends on sort of the pre-existing relationships and capacity of the local community to get involved. But it's always growing. It's always changing. Most recently, we're able to have a really great activation with the Paquachin First Nation here on the Saanich Peninsula. At Coles Bay, there was a big beach cleanup, and we leveraged our volunteers to come out and help out, remove massive amounts of debris. These huge tires, for some reason, were like sunken into the sand. And so that relationship's grown over the years, through meetings and collaborations and supporting their work. But I think really at the root of it is like we're driven to find ways to sort of take our enthusiasm or energy and apply it to some of the issues that they're observing in their community, right? So, Surfrider has its mission and certain ideas that it wants to focus on. But I think first and foremost, we're also super eager to adapt that and to be an ally in the work of First Nations communities that were sort of nearby or that are in our region. And so, yeah, it really is very organic. And so it can be a pre-existing work that we're doing that aligns with what they want to do, or maybe it's something new that we haven't really thought about that, we want to sort of help out with and get involved. So I think it's really special when it comes together, and the Foam Free Waters campaign, the dock retrofit in Tofino with Paloka, it was a very special example. And, we're excited to see that grow into new communities and new projects in the years ahead. That's really great. What about, I think you made a comment about, tires being sunken into the sand on the beach. And I think most people's experience with the ocean is perhaps almost like very superficial, right? They go to the beach, they sort of walk on the coastline. What do you, and many don't engage in a lot of this work. What do you think most people really like misunderstand about ocean protection, and perhaps why they may feel removed from it? Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to that earlier point I made. And, maybe I'm just speaking from my own personal perspective, but again, like the coastline, especially in British Columbia, is just like so shockingly beautiful. It's hard to imagine that there'd be these threats kind of just like underneath the surface. And so I feel like, people are led to believe that it's just inherently beautiful and inherently healthy. And so that's kind of the role that we've taken in the communities to really help raise awareness about some of these issues. And, and not in a negative way, like scare people, but just try to make them aware of some of the challenges that are present. A lot of times we host beach cleanups, and those are a pretty popular event for the different chapters and clubs that we have in our network. And, we have them at beaches that are accessible, and people often come and they're like, hey, this beach is clean. What are we even doing here? And arguably speaking, when, you've been to some of those remote beaches that I mentioned earlier, and you've seen just the buildup of like all the gnarly commercial fishing gear, you tend to agree with them. Like on the surface, yeah, absolutely. It does seem clean. Like, what are we doing here? But when you start to look just a little closer, at the surface, even dig into the sand a little bit, it doesn't take long to see just like that presence of the microplastics, which are arguably more harmful to the aquatic ecosystem than those big sort of plastic bottles or, once it's starting to break down into those particles, that's when it's a really big issue. And so we use those opportunities as educational moments, or those people who come, we have now a whole system of like screening sand to be able to remove or identify and remove what are commonly referred to as nurdles, or they're like small plastic pellets, which are used in the manufacturing of new plastic products. And it's like the raw feedstock for plastic. And, they end up on the beach, like here locally, from a various kind of a couple different reasons. And one is sometimes they're shipped through marine transport, and there's container spills and all the plastic just spills out and then it finds its way onto shorelines. That's a common way of that stuff building up. But also here in BC, we have like a bunch of different plastic manufacturers, right, in the Lower Mainland. And so if not managed well, that material can leak from their facilities through the stormwater system into the rivers, into the ocean, float around and wind up on beaches. And so, we get volunteers involved. They're screening the sand. They're finding these nurdles, and it's really opening their eyes to like the fact that there's more issues that are harder to see. And it's the same thing we do with our water quality testing program as well. So weekly, I've got volunteers going to different sites in Vancouver and Victoria and sampling water quality and identifying if there's high levels of Enterococcus or fecal coliform bacteria as an indicator of sort of water quality and safety for recreational water use. And again, like so many people go to the beach, like, oh, look at this beautiful beach and it looks fantastic and I should be able to go swimming. But it's quite shocking that some of the places that we think are just so safe are just demonstrating high levels of bacteria week after week after week. And you wouldn't know that. Like, how would you know that as an individual? You have no idea. Once in a while, you go to a beach and maybe the local health authorities put like a closure or like a warning out. But, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of like system to that approach. So our volunteers, they create this data. It's posted on our website. It's accessible. And, again, we want to raise awareness about this to break down those misconceptions that it's just inherently healthy. And really in the purpose of making sure people stay safe. Like we are lucky that, the bacteria levels compared to other settled communities in North America are low, but there can be serious threats. Like in California, it's so bad with like runoff after rain events there because it doesn't rain very often. So when it does rain, it just like fills the ocean with tons of effluent, things from dripping from your car to, animal feces, like all going into the water. It's recommended to not go in the water for 3 days after a rain event, right? So anyways, that's kind of like our purpose, is really trying to break down those misconceptions through the work that we do in community.
Yeah, that is and again, that's like one of those things where people just, because you can't see it, right? Like they feel like, oh, it's fine, it's healthy. I know I've been in various parts of the world where, like in California, like Dominican Republic, Portugal, this is something that happens. It's not just like in California, right? Like this is an issue that happens all over the world. And I remember, this is like in my teenage years, I was there for like a tennis tournament. No. And I remember in Dominican Republic, we were going to go to this one beach and the locals are like, you cannot go there, right? It was so bad. And that was like 30 years ago, right? Like, and so that hasn't gotten better really. And so this is like a massive issue. That is a global issue that most people don't recognize is like very serious for the environment. Like if we can't go into that environment, what does that actually mean for like ocean health, right? And so like switching gears a little bit, I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation about like having, future leaders in this space. How do you engage, whether it's like through volunteerism, obviously, but like new leaders or youth into this conversation around ocean conservation and advocacy?
Yeah. So for youth, the more effective way that they've been able to get involved in our organization is actually through organizing student clubs. And it hasn't always been a part of our organization. When I started getting involved with Surfrider, like in the mid 2000s, it was just community chapters that, youth could be a part of, anyone in the community, young or old, didn't matter. And then, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it started to grow in the US first, where they would have this student club network. So at high school, college, or university campuses, where students would form a club and they would sort of activate around Surfrider's mission within their institutional sort of context. And it's grown exponentially. And so just for example, in the US, there's around 80 community chapters, but there's about 120 student clubs. And even in Canada. So backing up a little bit. So Surfrider has been active in Canada for almost 20 years. And during that time, most of that time, we are just an extension of the US network. We received administrative support from the headquarters in Southern California, and it was great. But we were also limited to expanding and sort of really investing in issues that were, I think more Canadian centric. And although we speak the same language, our culture, our laws, they're all different. And so there were barriers for us to really, I think, upping our impact. So about 3 years ago, the board of directors for Surfrider Canada decided to break away fully from the US and become an independent Surfrider affiliate. And so that's what we did. And that process has enabled us to start to invest in expanding our network. And so over the course of the last 3 years, we've been able to create one new community chapter in Atlantic Canada. So now we have 4. But we've been able to launch a whole bunch of new student clubs. And so for a while, we had a student club at McGill in Montreal, and that's gone now. But we've launched a student club at Dalhousie in Halifax. That's still going strong. One at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo. Recently, one at University in Toronto in Ontario. And then just recently, we haven't really formally announced it yet, but at Mount Doug Secondary School in Saanich. And those clubs join our already pre-existing student clubs at University of Victoria and Ucluelet Secondary School. So I think you can tell, what's really ramping in our organization is the youth. They want to get involved and they want to get active, and they quickly observe and identify that Surfrider can be a powerful platform. And in fact, we've created a whole bunch of resources that, guide youth through understanding what the issues are and how they can get involved, and more importantly, make a difference within their community. And so, our UVic, our University of Victoria Student Club, is a really great example of affecting change in the university. And so they've been running this campaign called Plastics Free Campus, which has been working with the administration to eliminate single-use plastic products from being used in food services and replacing them with reusable food serviceware. And they've done it in dining facilities and coffee shops, and are just demonstrating that there are more sustainable options out there. And they're super proud of that work because they're making a change that they can celebrate within their student body, and that also can be used as an example for other institutions. So it's amazing what the students can do. And we've seen, time and time again, other really cool examples. And that's just inspired more student clubs to happen. And so it's great. It creates more administration for us to support the onboarding of these students. But we got to, because it's this is the next generation. If they see value in our work and they're ready to get active, then it's our duty to support them and really allow them to create these programs and campaigns that make a difference and that they can be proud of.
Absolutely. And having worked with, in my case, was young entrepreneurs and young social innovators, whatever they were working on, whether that pans out or not, I think it's just seeding the ideas and the possibility of showing up, raising my voice, participating actually does make a difference. And I think that actually sets them up to do even greater work in the future, whether it's with, Surfrider or a different organization or an organization they create. I think that is so important for young people to see that this work is possible and change is possible. And so on that note, we know that creating change really takes community. Community is critical here in creating that impact. What do you think otherwise? What does it take funding wise, politically, organizationally to actually do this work to protect our coastlines?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, kind of just backing up a little bit to the student clubs thing, what it really does need is skills, right? We have the passion, but it's the role that we take as Surfrider sort of head office in Canada is to first train these leaders in the community to really make a difference. And I think it's not inherent in the way that we grow in our careers to know how to do direct action advocacy. In fact, it can be very intimidating for many people. And so I think that is like the secret sauce that Surfrider is able to really help support, whether it's a community chapter or a student club, is providing a simple, straightforward way of understanding how to develop a direct action campaign. Figuring out what your goals, who your targets are, who your allies, who are your opponents, what are your tactics, what are your tools, all these things. Like, you don't learn that in university. There's no direct action 101. And so that's kind of the beginning point of it. And so for us, that is really, I think, at the root of our theory of change, right? It's like by investing in people, we build environmental leaders that lead to upstream policy change. So yeah, that is kind of the biggest thing that I feel has enabled us to grow. I talked also about the importance of focusing on upstream solutions and celebrating those and sharing those with people. But, I think it's really important to note that at the end of the day, we're advocating for a policy, and policies, they will create winners and losers. And for advocacy to be effective, it's so critical to have so many supporters and allies working with you. So, in other words, for the noise to be bigger than the opponent's noise, right? And that's what I found before I started a full-time career with Surfrider. I worked as a regulator for the Provincial Ministry of Environment, and worked on many recycling programs, and often implementing them came with a lot of pushback from industry. But, often on our side as a regulator, we're local governments, who are tired of managing this waste on the backs of taxpayers, that were really supportive of these policies. And the noise that they created, whether it was individually or through the Union of BC Municipalities, they would demonstrate to the decision makers, the provincial elected officials in this case, that there was more noise coming from them than from the industry. And so that kind of gave the decision makers the political leverage. And so that's a lesson that I've taken now and applied it to Surfrider, that really we have to build coalitions of supporters. We have to build a loud grassroots movement. We have to come to the table with solutions. All this stuff has to be in order for us to then go and really push for a campaign. Because otherwise, you're going to just be running up into more obstacles that are going to limit your ability to achieve your goal either quickly or at all. So that's kind of the things that, I really feel are critical to getting those changes made.
Great. A lot of work, but I love that approach. So if every policymaker in Canada was listening right now, what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, this is like a really exciting opportunity for them, right? So there's been a lot of really great momentum built in Canada, especially around plastics. In the last 15 years, there's been well over 80 different plastics interventions. When you look at the line graph, it's just shocking how fast it's gone up. This issue barely existed in our lives, and now it's one of the ones that are more front and center. And through that, I think acknowledgement of an issue in the communities and local governments, all the way up to the federal government, it's inspired a lot of innovation. And, Canada in many cases has been a leader, and it's been exciting to be part of that. We've had federal regulation banning problematic single-use plastics. That happened before the US and many other countries too. There's been really great momentum that I don't want to forget about. But I want to focus in on it because for me, that, it's such a powerful thing. So to be a leader and to be an innovator, government still has the opportunity to do that in so many ways. And it's our sort of responsibility to work with them to show where those opportunities are. And for me, that is kind of the big takeaway is don't stop your work, policymakers, keep it going, continue to be a leader, to continue to be an innovator. Cause you've built this really powerful momentum, right? And don't let it go, keep going with it.
It's a great advice. Hopefully they're all listening. We'll tag them all. So what advice would you give to someone, I think there's lots of folks that, appreciate being in nature, being at the ocean. What advice would you give to someone who feels overwhelmed with all the work that needs to be done or the challenges that exist, but really wants to, participate and wants to help protect the ocean, but is just overwhelmed and doesn't know where to start? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, it is really daunting when you think about it on your own. But if they have the opportunity to get involved with a group of people, it doesn't have to be Surfrider. There could be, some of your listeners could be in other areas where there isn't a Surfrider chapter. I'm likely there'll be some sort of environmental organization. But from my experience, what I've seen is that you take that concern, you take that enthusiasm, and then you find other people that share that and you work together, and it does lead to change. Inevitably, things will happen. And so that to me is, I think, the biggest piece of advice is you don't want to deal with these issues independently. You want to work on them together. And so, yeah, if people do live in a community, there's a Surfrider chapter, a student club, go get involved, and it will be a powerful experience. If you're in a place where there isn't one, you can create one. You can bring together a group of people. We can support you and train you to become leaders in your community. And so, yeah, but really back to the big point of your question is you've got to work together. That through that community effort is what's really gonna, I think, provide a sense of pride and accomplishment towards achieving real impact.
Yeah, it is so true. No one person or even one group can achieve any of this change. It does take all of these organizations and people to come to the table to create the systems change. And we will share all the details in the show notes for how folks can get engaged with Surfrider as well. So the last question, we would love to hear, what's next for Surfrider, and are there any big initiatives or priorities for you that you would love to share?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that we have recently launched and are developing and making sort of take off is we have this new program called Resurf, Surf Gear Circularity, and it's creating a first of a kind end of life management program for surf gear waste. And it's never really been done before at the scale that we're trying to accomplish. And yeah, for us, it's, surfers are, often, at least in Surfrider, we're driven to participate in this organization because of our connection to the water through our activity, whether it's surfing or paddleboarding or whatever connects you to the ocean. Often that hobby, requires this gear that is made of plastic. And, there's environmental impact at the manufacturing process, the use, all the way down to the end of life management. And so there's this weird push and pull where you're driven to be an environmentalist, yet the stuff that you just inherently require is very toxic. And so we, are stepping right into that sort of sticky space and working hard to find a solution to the end of life management of this material. So we've created a facility on the west coast of Vancouver Island in Hewlett, British Columbia, that is basically diverting all surf gear waste from landfill to our facility where we can repair it, reuse it. And if it's kind of beyond repair and reuse, then finding ways to responsibly recycle it and even upcycle it into cool new products. And so, yeah, there's been a patchwork of things here locally, but also around the world that's tried to find ways to manage this material at end of life. But it's never really had significant investment, nor has it really had the economies of scale needed, the volume needed to really invest in some of the processing infrastructure. So we were really fortunate to receive a grant from the provincial government, the Clean BC Plastics Action Fund. And it's enabled us to invest in developing a facility that's got all that equipment and supplies, all that sort of that capital investment that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own. And so it was a massive grant that enabled us to build up this facility that's spearheading all these really innovative practices. And the cool thing is that, recycling can often get a bad kind of rap because you can take a product and turn it into a lower value product that kind of is then destined for disposal eventually. The goal with recycling is to find ways to keep the material very circular. And so that it comes back into being used in the product that it was initially used for. And we've, through our research and development through this grant, have been able to identify really exciting opportunities for both neoprene from wetsuits and the expanded polystyrene from surfboards to be able to be used back into those products. And so working with, various third parties and industry sort of supporters, we found opportunities to make the recycling of that gear as circular as possible. Not only are we extending the life cycle and, making sure that stuff stays in use for as long as possible, eventually when it is just done, we've found ways to make sure it's recycled back into new. surfboards and wetsuits too. So it's, our goal through this is like to, troubleshoot all these, sort of challenges and obstacles and overcome them and create processes that we can then hopefully one day replicate in other communities around the world. Because the same experience and same attitude and ideas that we have here are shared in other surf communities. So, if we can find the model that works, and if we can then work with some of our other Surfrider affiliates or even like other surf communities that want to do something to the scale, we can help guide them through that process. And so that's our big sort of project right now, and that we're aiming to develop. We have this grant, and it's going to be sort of active for the next year, and then we'll be developing various other revenue streams, finding other grants, investments, and stuff. And again, just really trying to build this out as like a first of a kind initiative that we can use to showcase to new communities. So that's kind of the big thing for us in terms of what's on the horizon right now. And then, we continue to grow and expand. Like I mentioned earlier, like people are just emailing us like, we want a chapter, we want a club, and we don't want to say no. So we're like hustling to find resources, and it's kind of the classic nonprofit charity sort of hamster wheel of, getting money to do the mission work. And so that continues to just be something that we're working on. But like, again, we're so confident in our model that like it's working, and when we started to create Surfrider Canada as an independent affiliate 3 years ago, that was our vision. We wanted to expand across Canada to address the issues that affect all our coast. And seeing the US and the expansion and growth there, using that as a roadmap, we're starting to realize that vision, which is really exciting. So it's kind of just like keep on plugging away at the sort of like bread and butter approach to building our network, and great things come from it. This resurf program I told you about is actually like the genesis of it came from the community members in Tofino and Yuki being like, oh, there's so much waste here. What are we going to do? And in fact, a volunteer had tried to spearhead ways to recycle wetsuits into yoga mats and other things. And so it was very grassroots in the beginning. And surfboards as well. It was like, how can we deal with all the surfboard waste that's going to the landfill? And so, we create and support these chapters and clubs. These people come up with ideas that in this case of resurf, we can find some grant money and then just, crank it to 11 and really take that idea to the next level. So yeah, that's kind of for, opportunities and initiatives. Those are kind of the big things that are on our horizon.
Those are exciting and certainly, not small initiatives. And what's great is that they're, I do love that sort of like the birth of all of these solutions coming from community and coming from those that really like they are on the coast. And I think that's so powerful. And it's exciting to hear all of the things that you're working on. And also exciting to hear that they're growing and that there is appetite for it. And that, even the policymakers are listening as well, which is, I think, super, super important. So thank you so much for joining us, Lucas. I've loved this conversation, and thank you again.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, Joanna. I'd be happy to return anytime.
As we wrap up today's episode, we hope you're leaving with insights that ignite a spark within you. At the core of every story we cover lies the undeniable truth. What truly drives impact is the relentless pursuit of change, paired with a deep commitment to the greater good. We're always reminded that making a mark on the world is not an easy task and isn't just about breaking through barriers. It's about thinking differently about what sustainability means in our ever-changing world and what is possible in creating it. Thank you so much for joining us on Ideas for Impact, where rebels with a cause redefine the meaning of what is possible. For more episodes that challenge the norm, follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, always dive deeper into our journey with us at ideasforimpactagency.com. Until next time, friends, keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible.